Most dynasty managers treat draft picks like they're guaranteed starters, and they aren't. And that mistake is quietly destroying their roster construction. A mid-first isn't necessarily a starter, it's a probability, but people treat it like it's a certainty. And today we're going to be talking about why you should stop treating draft picks like they're guaranteed starters for your team and start treating them like assets that you can use for future team building. My name is Caleb, and this is Dynasty Edge HQ, where we help you think like a GM so you can take your teams from rebuilding and building them towards championships for years to come. If you like this style of content where we talk about strategy, hit the subscribe button down below. Let me know what state your team is in, or any trade questions that you have. I'd love to answer them and have you a part of this community. And today we're going to be talking about how picks are probabilities, not necessarily production. The 1.07, it is not necessarily a wide receiver 2. The 110 is not necessarily a starting running back. Second round picks are lottery tickets. When you draft a player, you're not drafting points, you're drafting uncertainty. And I think that's one of the problems this year with the 2026 class, is that people are uncertain about it. And that's why it's being perceived as a lower draft class. People don't like uncertainty, they like certainty. And so I think one mindset that teams get in trouble with is that they start to view picks as a certain thing. They're like, oh yeah, this pick is going to be a wide receiver 1 for years to come. And that's just not the case all the time. Sometimes you have players that everybody considers that's going to be a number 1 asset. This year, Jeremiah Love, everyone considers that is going to be a staple for your team. And statistically, that's probably going to be the case. And so you can depend on those higher end picks, but anything after a certain range, you just can't count on that certainty. And so what I want to get into your mind today is understanding that you should not view draft picks as guaranteed starters. You should use them as value for your team. And drafting a player is fine. You can totally draft players at any range in the draft. Just having the expectation that no matter what, they're a set in stone starter for your team is just not reliable. There have been so many countless instances where players have not worked out that have been drafted high. Players that have fallen off after 1 year, and where are they now? Anthony Richardson, that was a 1.01 or a 1.02 pick in many drafts. And where has he gone now? He's a backup quarterback at best. Maybe he'll get an opportunity in the future, but his value has tanked. People depended on him. He was a certainty in people's eyes. And so I want you to stop viewing them as certainties and view them as values and treat them as such. And when the value gets to a certain point, it's a decent idea to sell at that point. Sometimes you can keep them. It's just your own risk tolerance that you have with your team that you have to be okay with. But understand that you can't just view them as a certain asset and starter for your team, because that's just not always going to be the case. A lot of the time, people have this illusion of control over their team. They see that, they say that I'll just draft well. I'll identify the breakout. I'm better at picking the draft picks than these professional teams. Now, I want you to start thinking like a GM when you come here, but typically, we're just not at the same level as them. They're drafting the players. The NFL tells us the value of these players. We can have a player propped up at the highest level, and then the draft tells us the story. Years ago, we had Malik Willis that everyone thought was going to go in the top 5 in the NFL draft until he didn't. And the NFL told us the story of what his career was going to be like. Well, now actually, if you held on to Malik Willis, he's turning out to be a decent asset. But for years, he was just on the back burner because of where he got drafted and because NFL teams told us what his value is. And just to be honest, hit rates with all the positions are brutal. It can be really hard to draft. And so understanding that you can use these picks as value, a lot of the times trading up or trading down in tiers, trading up to get a more certain player or a position that has a higher percentage of being a player for your team, are all good ways to handle this. Mid-first rates are nowhere near 100%. So understanding that you could be drafting in the first round and still not get a starter level player, you just have to be okay with that. When you draft at a certain place, you have to be okay with where it's at. Next year, there are so many teams that I keep hearing have 4 2027 firsts. And yes, that class has the perception of being a really good class. That is, until it's not. And I'm not saying the 2027 class is not going to be good. Please don't take that away from this video, but understand that you can use those for their value for your draft and use that to the advantage of your team. Don't just depend on those being number one starters for your team for years to come. Pick your players, that's totally fine, but understand that it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be a starter for your team. Now, how does this hurt rosters? How do these mistakes, how does doing this or having this mindset that they're going to be starters, how does that hurt rosters? Contenders get worse. You know, a contender goes all in on a draft class and gets a bunch of picks in the first round, expecting that they're going to fill out the rest of their starting lineup with these picks. Now, instead of buying points, they do this. And yes, maybe it helps you have value over the long term. But if you're in a competing window and you're depending on drafted players to produce for you, that's not a winning strategy. That's a winning strategy over time, having valuable players. But as a contender, it can really dilute your team. And then you're depending on players. Like if you depended on Ashton Genty this past year, you know, he had a couple big weeks, but for the most part, he, you know, had a very up and down season. It was hard to depend on him. He's a great asset going forward, but understanding that especially for a contender in the first year or so of drafting players, you should not expect that they're just going to be the starter level number one asset from the get-go. Have expectations, know what it does. Sometimes rebuilders misjudge timelines. You're like, hey, I'm coming out of a rebuild. I have like 5 first-round picks this year. After this, I'll be ready to contend. Just because you have five first-round picks doesn't mean you're going to automatically be ready to contend right away. Sometimes those players take time to develop. So you have to understand that just because you have a ton of first-round picks, you can't just plug those in as starters. You have to understand that you have sometimes a 50% chance that they're going to be a starter, sometimes less than that, depending on the position. So you have to have that expectation and plan accordingly. In a rebuild, drafting all those players is fine, but just don't have the expectation your team's just going to crush it out of the get-go. Another way that this can really set you up for worse is if you're a contender or even a rebuilder and you overpay for certain draft picks. That can really set your team back because you overpay for a certain player at a certain position and it doesn't work out. That can set your team backwards. That's why I tell rebuilders to build out before they build up, meaning taking a 1.02 and turning it into multiple picks, a 1.03 plus a second, and on down the road, giving yourself more chances at the draft will give you more of a percentage to actually hit a actual starter. And so build out before you build up. And then with contenders, maybe not drafting at the 1.07, maybe trading that for a player that's producing now that's a little bit older to help your team move forward. And so understanding that you can do things that'll help your team so that you don't get stuck in a place where your team is not moving forward, you're not able to capitalize in these picks, and it can hurt you. So just understand, draft pick does not always equal starter. The smarter framework is that you need to treat picks as a range of outcomes, understanding that instead of thinking like this is my number 2 receiver next year, think that there's a percentage chance. I would say, you know, a very good outlook is a 50% chance. So look at each pick as this is a 50-50 chance that this player might produce for me this year or next year. And so just having that in mind, don't have it just set that you're going to have that. And understand that sometimes the better play is to get a producing player that's undervalued. Okay, so don't just go for the pretty shiny new thing. Sometimes it's better just to get a player that's producing because you're not risking anything. You know that player is going to produce. You know that player is good, and it's going to help your team. And so that's a better way to do that. Another way to help in this, another way to treat this pick, situation is to sell picks when the market is high on them. When players are just like crushing the combine, when free agency shows that they're not going to pick up a running back, that they might be drafting a running back, that's the time to go and sell these picks. Treat them like assets instead of set player values. This is going to set your team up for the best success long term so that you don't get in a situation where you've traded everything for picks and then your picks don't work out. That can be a risky way to run your team. You want to give yourself the most shots to possibly get picks if you're a rebuilder, and if you're a contender, you're really trying to get producing players. And then Honestly, don't always anchor your rebuild to rookies. Sometimes it's better to trade rookie picks for a young emerging asset that actually has produced, that maybe the community is down on for whatever reason, and then moving forward with that player. A player like Garrett Wilson might be a good one to go after instead of drafting one of these new wide receivers. A player like Chris Olave is another one that has proven that he can do it in the league. I don't like being player takey, but like those are examples of players that are young, that have produced, that I would look at as less risky than drafting a certain player at a certain price. And so look for deals where you can do that if you want to help your team move forward and not put so much risk on these drafted players. Because ultimately, if every year all you have is picks, yes, you're going to hit on a few players, but if you don't hit on every single player, what is your team going to do? And you might just be wasting money year after year instead of moving your team forward. You don't have to lose in Dynasty just because you drafted the wrong player. You lose because you mispriced uncertainty. So understand, don't view players or picks as this certain asset. Understand that it is uncertain and that you just need to play the value game instead of the player game. We get too attached to players. We get too attached to names. Detach yourself from that. Have some players that you like. It's totally fine to like certain players. I have my guys on my teams. That's totally fine. But remain mostly player agnostic, and it's going to help your teams move forward because you're not just forcing a certain player on your roster. And if you're having a little bit of trouble figuring out what direction your roster is going, are you going towards being a contender? Are you more of a rebuilder? What I'm offering right now is roster reviews. The link is down in the description where I help you figure out which direction your team is going, and I get you going on the direction that is best for your team long term. So check out roster reviews if you'd like. Subscribe to the channel down below. Let me know what you got away from this video and what are you doing with picks to best set your team up for the future. I'll see you guys in the next video.